Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Planted Unearthed. My name's Sam Peters and I'm one of the co-founders of Planted, first contemporary design show aimed at reconnecting with nature. As part of the Planted Unearthed series, we've been exploring how design, sustainability, food production, architecture and nature can combine to create cleaner, greener, healthier spaces. We're looking in depth at how we can restore and reconnect with nature by speaking to some of the most innovative and respected thinkers in this field. Today, we're talking to the founder of a brand who we at Planted hold in especially high esteem, in part because they sponsored our inaugural physical event at King's Cross in September, but also because they share our vision of reconnecting with nature. Biotecture do not just grow, install and design living walls, but their products improve the visual aesthetic, air quality and wider environment, and you will no doubt be seeing far more of their work in and around cityscapes in the near future. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Richard Sabin onto Planted Unearthed today. Richard, welcome.
Hi Sam, nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. Great to have you here, and great in a virtual way. Sadly, that's as it is at the moment. The last time we saw each other, obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, at the Planted event, which Biotecture were a huge part of back in September when we weren't in lockdown. We're of course now getting on for a couple of months later, and we are back in lockdown. I mean, so inevitably, question for you: how is lockdown going, Richard? And how's business and how's things at home as well?
Oh, okay, yeah. So it is nice to be here, even though I'm at my home. It feels like we are together, and it was great to catch up at the Planted event in September. It's like a breath of fresh air, being able to see people in 3D and. You know, see plants actually blowing in the wind rather than just pictures of them on screens was fantastic. I think going back into this second period of lockdown, there's a little bit of deja vu happening. I think a lot of people, particularly within my business, a lot of their mental sort of strength has kind of waned a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and so we're kind of propping each other up again, I think. And I think a lot of it is a flashback to the length of time we were in lockdown previously. From a business point of view, a lot of people's eyes aren't focused on the future at the moment. Well, they are focused on the future, but they're not focused on the future of greening and how they can do that. I think the news of a vaccine, which came out just before we've recorded this actually, is going to have an impact in terms of people's ideas of the future. So that's going to be great. Business at the moment is fine. We're doing okay. A couple of our markets are completely kind of trapped off, really. We do a lot of work, as you know, probably in the transportation sectors, so airports and train stations and things like that, and that sort of avenue is being cut off from us. And then the internal corporate market as well is really a watch and see space at the moment as people's working patterns change, and it's going to be really interesting to see in 2021 what happens with that.
I mean, we spoke again before we recorded this about the outdoor product that you guys have brought to the market as well, and something that we used as the backdrop, no less, to the Planted studio at King's Cross back in September. But could you tell us a little bit about that product that you guys are bringing to market, and where you might see that in the future, and indeed where people could look to purchase it if they're interested, because it is a beautiful product and one that the aesthetic of the studio we thought was absolutely perfect for us.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's a living wall system we call plantbox. It's a vertical, freestanding, stackable modular system that allows for all of the load to go down to the ground. So one of the locations that we're really promoting at the moment is greening up construction sites. A lot of people think about, you know, the sustainability of the building when it's complete, but a lot of construction sites in some of our major cities are there for an awfully long time. And a lot of construction companies and clients are thinking about how they can have perhaps some more consideration for the communities that are around them, but also to display their own green credentials. And this product can stand on the ground and then be simply restrained back to construction site hoardings. So there's a commercial aspect for it, and it's great for retrofits as well. We also have a retail market where we sell it to any consumers who'd like to buy it for courtyards, back gardens, balconies, anywhere where you've got a little bit of space, but perhaps not as much space from a greening point of view. So we kind of, we're bringing life to walls and bringing walls to life, if you like, in terms of that aspect. So yeah, it's a product that we want to be seen across the urban realm, not only in people's homes, but also greening up construction sites and retrofitting a lot of our existing building stock that's there.
And in turn, I mentioned things like the improvements to air quality. Can you talk a bit about what evidence is there to show that by having some of these beautiful living walls, these plant structures, vertical plant structures, how do they improve the environment? What are the benefits that people might find?
So there's a couple of factors that come into play when we have plants in our environment, whether that's at home or whether that's in an urban environment. You've got the physical properties of plants themselves, biological properties, chemical properties, whatever you want, but the actual plants themselves and what they can do. Obviously on a global scale, what has nature ever done for us? Well, apart from fresh air, fresh water, security, safety, and all that sort of things, and firewood and everything else, we can start to rebalance that within the urban realm and where we live as well with their physical properties in terms of cleaning the air, increasing biodiversity, or decreasing the loss of biodiversity is probably the better way around of putting it. We have urban heat island effect of all these reflecting surfaces that plants can absorb. So beyond those sort of standard sort of scientific properties of plants that can do bits and pieces, you've also got our psychological connection with them, the whole idea of biophilia. And this is extraordinary in the fact that, even looking at a plant will reduce our blood pressure and our heart rate. So when you combine these two things, the physical properties and our psychological connection, you end up with this sort of multiple benefit stream that's available to us, including air pollution reduction. And we need to remember that it's us who've caused the air pollution problems. This is a mitigation reason. So there's mitigation and enrichment measures that you get from including biology within a space. And all of those can lead to returns on investment. And how do we define that return on investment? And if we're enriching spaces to create places where people can breathe easier, can feel more creative and more productive, then there's this sort of circular financial return on investment that comes into this. There's lots of scientific evidence in terms of each of these individual benefits. So air pollution reduction, for example, there's a number of studies that have been carried out that show that depending on the environment and depending on the airflow, but particularly in something called urban street canyons, where the width between buildings is less than the height of the buildings, where air can get endlessly circulating. If you can trap that air in a green wall, for example, you are taking that air out of circulation. So there's a lot of evidence around on each of these individual benefits. But what we tend to see is this multiple benefit impact. So when we use the green walls as a cladding system, for example, there are no other alternative cladding systems that can provide any more than generally one of these benefits. Whereas with green walls, we tend to find both the physical benefits and the psychological enrichment benefits that come as well.
And I mean, it's from a practical perspective, Richard, people might look at these systems and go, well, how on earth do I maintain them? How do I keep them alive and flourishing? I mean, how easy are they just to maintain?
That's an interesting question, because we have a maintenance department. So I could say they're really easy, but then our maintenance department wouldn't thank me, our technicians that are out there. I think, the simple answer to that is that, how do you maintain plants in your garden? There is an attention that's required to them. The additional issue with growing vertically is generally the irrigation system and how we allow, or watering system, and how we allow that water to work and how we can control it. We work in a number of sort of high-end commercial environments, Wimbledon Court number 1, Lord's Cricket Ground, various other spaces and places where we have a remote monitoring on the irrigation system. And it's really, really important that we do that, because we don't want to see any public failures. But when you're growing in your back garden, it's as simple as a hose lock connection and putting the water into that system. And some people get their benefits out of plants by seeing them, by being in nature. Other people get their benefit by actually getting their hands into nature. And so, we can offer all of those options when we start looking at vertical greening. You can grow for decoration, you can grow for biodiversity, you can, you can start growing herbs and salads that you actually want to grow yourselves and then eat the fruit of your labours. So, and all of these things give us an immense sense of satisfaction.
And we talked about the benefits when we're talking kind of outside air quality improvements, the visual aesthetic, that connection with nature, those principles of biophilia, but obviously they work indoors as well. And you know, when we're talking about office spaces and commercial benefits of this, it's not just about making things feel nice. It's actually about improving people's creativity, productivity, their mental health. All those things are really important factors when it comes to a workforce, isn't it? If you've got a happy, healthy team, then your business is going to do better. It's sort of one follows the other.
Completely. And I think that actually for internal greening, there is an element where it's actually easier to prove the benefits because the space is constrained in terms of an environment. And the benefits are again, multiple. Again, you have environmental benefits in terms of air quality. You have an acoustic benefit that can come into that as well. You then have many people benefits as well in terms of, you know, the idea of enriching spaces and how that impacts on your workforce, your clients, whatever it might be. And we find a lot of the larger corporations are seeking to create communities rather than just workplaces now. And I think that's really interesting because communities are obviously built of people. And we have noticed, particularly during lockdown, the first lockdown, we have noticed as people the importance of our reconnection with nature. And what tends to happen within an office environment is we have quite bland, quite severe office developments with token plants in them sometimes. And these create quite stressful environments for us to be in. And then at weekends, we go and escape to the country. We'll go gardening. We'll go, you know, find our peace and our solace in nature. What we can do by bringing nature into the workplace is actually redress this balance a little bit, so that we are working in an environment where we can be almost in nature. And by doing so, it's really interesting about how much more creative and productive people will be in green spaces. There are a number of really well peer-reviewed studies showing between 9 and 12% is generally the view of how people will perform in a planted environment compared to a non-planted environment. And so I think, you know, this is really interesting study about not just productivity and creativity, but also about staff welfare, staff retention, and the return on investment is obvious, because if you've got more productive, creative people who want to stay in your business, then you don't have to have those costs of recruitment, staff training, all those things that you would have to come across. So what we're talking about here, for me, both outside and inside, but is designing spaces that are suitable for human beings rather than for human doings. And I feel that a lot of what urban design, both again inside and outside, is very functional, because buildings need to have a function, because that's the reason they were produced in the first place. But then all of the design is designed around that function. It's designed around human doing. The irony is, if you design around human beings will do better, because they're surrounded by things that make them feel safe. That maybe like when we were sitting at the planted venue, and Oliver Heath made that mention of, it feels like we're getting a great big green hug from this green wall that's around us. That's an environment in which people can feel comfortable, feel settled, and will actually work better and more productively. So this is what we're encouraging, and I think this may even help to make the workplace more appetizing post-COVID. When people start to come back to work, how can we get them back in? Well, let's create a community, including plants.
You've just by recalling that story, Richard, you've made me feel better inside. I mean, it was such a lovely quote, wasn't it? And so appropriate for the space that you guys built for us. And I mean, certainly from putting on an event, I've seen Debs, my wife, do it when she worked with Design Junction back in the years gone by, but also now being in this environment myself, knowing how challenging it is to put on an event, and the stressful nature and the relentless, time-consuming, meticulous sort of attention that you need to pay it in the run-up, during, and after. it's quite an intense and stressful time. And you know, I can vouch very much for the fact that you know, Oliver's referenced a big green hug. I mean, there were several times during the event that we staged, and I think running events at this particular time in our human existence is perhaps as challenging as it's ever been. You know, there were several times I just took a time out and just went and sat there. We had those lovely Vestra chairs, which was sat out on the forecourt of Granary Square, and you know, just sitting. The sun was shining and the wind was blowing across the face of the wall that we built in the studio, and it was just a really lovely, calm space to be. And every time I went there and just took that time out, I felt energized afterwards. It was just, you know, maybe just for 5 or 10 minutes, just a little bit of downtime, just to rest and sort of and go again. And it was hugely beneficial just on a personal level, and extraordinary how quickly you were able to build that, you know, the Biotecture studio, and create this sense of nature in such a sort of relatively small space, but it had such an impact. It was really quite something quite special and memorable from our point of view, and hopefully everyone who was able to come and sit in the space. So thank you again for all of the work you and your team did during the event, Richard. But you know, one of the things, you know, we were lucky enough to have you as a panelist on one of the talks, the Blooming Buildings talk, which was the third of the 3 talks that we ran that day, on the Friday of the event. And Oliver was obviously part of that panel as well. And one of the things we discussed there, which I continue to be really interested in, and I think we're Planted are very, very interested in, is how do we move the conversation on from just being a conversation amongst a group of relatively small group of like-minded people who kind of see the value in nature and understand that it's not just as we discussed before we recorded, that it's not just a kind of new concept to be reconnecting with nature. Indeed, it's one of the oldest concepts of, that there could possibly be. But how do we start to affect change in a genuine sense and in a positive sense? What are the sort of next steps that we need to take?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? And sometimes it feels like you're banging the drum of being a greenie, and almost apologising for it. But I don't think we need to. I think the important thing to start that piece of conversation is to try to understand where it is we want to get to as a human race. What is it we want to achieve? Do we want our cities to be places where people just survive and come in and do a piece of work, and the economy is about it rules our lives? Or do we want our cities to be places where people can thrive, where they have access to green spaces, where they have access to all the sort of sporting and cultural facilities that would make a rounded city and a rounded development, and to basically give us something to look at in the future? And I think a lot of the case, we need to move the conversation on from cost to value. And this is sometimes where we really struggle to get a cohesive society to understand what we're talking about here. I think one of the interesting things was, and I might have mentioned it at the Planted seminar in September, was a study the Landscape Institute have commissioned recently that shows for every £1 that's spent on parks maintenance, it saves society £7 in terms of mental health, obesity, and some other factors that come into there as well. And you think, well, how as a society can we not find that £1 to do the park maintenance to save us to £7? And it's a very sort of a single look at what is much multifaceted issue that sits around the value that we can have of having nature within our spaces and places, and that value is coming to bear. So I'm sorry, and the return on investments that come to bear from having that value. So where is it we want to go to, and what challenges are we facing is a second point, which is around, in 25 years time or so, more than 70% of the population will be living in cities. In 25 years time or so, some of our cities in southern England will have the same temperature as cities in southern France or Spain. How climate adapted are we to that? What can plants do in terms of redefining the heat spaces within cities? How can we place make cities to really encourage people to have spaces where we feel like we are enriched, because surely this is what we want as human beings. So for me, it's about designing spaces that have value around, again, human beings. And I'd like to see it to be a creative upwelling, but there also needs to be an element of compliance and some sort of top-down view of what it is we want to see. And we spoke again in September about the struggles that nature has for anybody to give it a voice within government, within lobbying groups. Some of the countries have take a slightly more, I think, more mature view around it. In Germany, for example, if you install some green infrastructure in some of the cities in Germany, 50% of that is paid for by the city, because they recognise the benefit that it gives not only to the developer but to other people out and around that space. So I'd love to see a stronger argument. Maybe we need to have more of a lobby group in Parliament doing things for nature, but who's that going to be? Because we're not the concrete society. We're not. We haven't got lots of big business behind us. We're generally a conglomeration of smaller businesses who are trying to effect change within this. And as I've found, we're trying to introduce green infrastructure consultancy. Effecting change is really difficult because people just want to go down the usual route of, well, I've got my design team, I've got my architect, I've got my structural engineer, I've got my whatever else, and my landscape architect. And the architects and landscape architects, even the very enlightened ones, and we work with them for a lot of them, don't fully understand the role that green infrastructure plays within an urban realm in terms of having the same constraints as any other building material, and yet we're trying to create these living cities within there. And so when we talk to clients about, well, let's have a look at a bit of green infrastructure consultancy, oh, this is a great idea, but it's new, isn't it? And you think, well, what, having nature around us is new, and it's treated with suspicion as well. And you know, this is so odd. This is so odd that having plants in spaces is treated with suspicion. And I'd love for us to break through this one. I really would. And I think it's happening. It's not happening as fast as I'd like it to happen. But one of the things that I'm seeing through this lockdown that's happened recently, which is totally different to the last recession, where at the last recession, green stuff was completely red penned off everything. This time, clients are still talking about well-being. They're still talking about their impact on the environment as being a really strong key message. And so I think that this is going to be client-driven, and I think we're going to get some early adopters who are going to do some pretty amazing things with biophilic design, and that will hopefully lead the rest.
Well, I completely agree and share your vision there, Richard, for sure. I think from our point of view, it's been interesting just to see you learn what you need rather than what you want through this process. And, you know, you kind of, it's when you strip everything back, and if things aren't, cash isn't flowing in quite the way it was, that's stating the obvious for so many people. But then you start to look at the things that really bring you satisfaction and enjoyment and a kind of deep-seated sense of happiness without putting too sort of emotional point on it. But that idea of what you value over what the things cost, it's and you so often gravitate back to beautiful things, like as in natural things, plants, trees, green spaces, and that's certainly been a factor in our life personally, but I think you've seen it across so many parts of society now. That
there's a massive misconception as well, I think, in terms of this cost versus value debate. You look at the green energy potential. Even in the recent American elections, the green energy business is larger than the oil business in America. So this thing about, oh, what's it going to cost? Well, hold on a second. How many jobs is it going to create? What's the value that we can create by adopting a more mature, holistic landscape view of how we're going to deal with our urban realm?
So it's such an important point, and you know, perhaps that's the way to keep pushing the message out there that this has to be the future. It's not really too much of a choice, because if we get this wrong and don't change, then you know, the evidence is there to show the problems that are in front of us. But and perhaps a sort of broad position to take is, you know, perhaps we just all need to look at a longer term view and rather than just what's right in front of us day by day. But you know, certainly from our perspective, Richard, we're enormously grateful to Biotecture. We think it's a fantastic product, a fantastic business with a great team. It was great to meet all your team at the Planted event, and hopefully there'll be many more in the future to come where we can work together, because yeah, can't speak highly enough of what you guys do. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been another really interesting conversation with you. We've had some already in the past, and no doubt there'll be more in the future. So thanks to Richard Sabin for joining us today. If you have enjoyed today's series of Planted Unearthed, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, details of which can be found on our website, www.planted-cities.co.uk. On there, you'll find more great content, including our 3-part Planted Unplugged Talks programme, led by myself and Oliver Heath, and, as I mentioned, featuring Richard Sabin, which we filmed live at King's Cross in September as part of London Design Festival. Look out also for interviews with Nick Shute and Stefan Dodds from Dodds & Shute, and an interview with the wonderful Anna from Horticus Living. And that just leaves it for me to say thanks again to Richard from Biotecture. Thanks to you for watching. My name's Sam Peters, and this has been Planted Unearthed. Lovely. Richard, that was great. Thank you very much. I think I've stopped recording, but I haven't. Sorry. Let's stop recording.